She ran a $1 billion company from a wheelchair, and one by one, every person around her disappeared. Assistants resigned, executives stopped showing up. Bodyguards quit without notice. In 3 years, the most powerful woman in the building became the most alone. Then a maintenance worker with a 5-year-old daughter walked through her door and refused to leave. What happened next changed both of them forever. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell on this channel will stop you mid-scroll every single time. Drop a like if you're already feeling this one, and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one goes deep. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Mason Carter stepped out carrying a toolbox in one hand and a crumpled work order in the other. He stopped. The hallway up here was different from the rest of the building. Downstairs, Evercrest Technologies hummed with the low, constant noise of a company that took itself very seriously. Keyboards, phone calls, the rolling wheels of office chairs across hard floors. Someone always arguing in a glass-walled conference room about numbers Mason didn't understand and didn't need to. Up here, on the executive floor, there was almost nothing. Recessed lighting threw a pale glow across a stretch of empty carpet. A reception desk sat abandoned near the elevator bank, the computer screen dark, a coffee mug still sitting on the corner of it like the person who'd left it there planned to come right back. They hadn't come back. Mason checked the work order again. 42nd floor, executive suite, HVAC vent rattling. Report to facilities supervisor upon completion. He'd been with the building's maintenance contractor for 11 days. This was the first time anyone had sent him to the top floor. He walked down the hall slowly, glancing left and right. Office doors, most of them closed. Nameplates on some, blank holders on others where nameplates used to be. He counted 4 desks through one glass partition, all empty, all clean in the way that meant they'd been empty for a while, not just today. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors. No nameplate. Just the doors, solid and dark, and a thin strip of light visible underneath them. Mason knocked. Nothing for a moment. Then a voice from inside, measured and unhurried. "It's open." He pushed the door with his shoulder and stepped into the largest private office he'd ever been inside. Floor-to-ceiling windows took up the entire far wall, and beyond them the city spread out like something from a photograph, gray and silver and massive in the early morning light, buildings stacking themselves against a pale sky. The view alone probably cost more than Mason made in a year. The woman behind the desk was looking at him the way people look at someone they expected but weren't particularly excited about. She was younger than he'd imagined a CEO would be. 30, maybe, with dark hair pulled back without ceremony and sharp eyes that moved over him quickly, cataloging, assessing, moving on. She wore a dark blazer over a plain shirt. Her hands rested on the desk beside an open laptop, and beside the desk, positioned at an angle that suggested it was exactly where she'd placed it herself, was a wheelchair. Not beside her. She was in it. Mason didn't react or tried not to. He just held up the work order. "Maintenance. I've got a ticket for a rattling vent." "North wall," she said. Upper left corner. "It starts around 7 in the morning when the system kicks on and doesn't stop until someone hits it with something." "You've been hitting it?" "With a stapler." A pause. "It doesn't help." "No," Mason said. "It usually doesn't." He set his toolbox down and looked toward the north wall. The vent was up high, maybe 9 feet, set into a decorative panel just below the ceiling. He'd need a ladder. He hadn't brought one. "I'll have to go get a stepladder from the service closet on 40. "There's one in the supply room at the end of the hall, left side, behind the shelving." He looked at her. "You know where your supply room ladder is?" "I know where everything in this building is," she said, and it didn't come out arrogant. It came out like a fact, stated plainly, the way you'd say the sky is overcast. "My name is Vivian Hayes. I run this company. Mason Carter. I fix things." She almost smiled. "Not quite, but almost. The supply room is unlocked." He found the ladder, he fixed the vent, a loose screw, and a warped bracket, 20 minutes of actual work. And he was packing his tools back into the box when she spoke again without looking up from her laptop. "You didn't stare." Mason zipped the toolbox. "Ma'am?" "At the chair." She still wasn't looking at him. Most people stare for at least a few seconds. You didn't. He thought about it honestly. I noticed it. Figured it wasn't any of my business. Now she looked up. Something shifted in her expression, something small and guarded that he couldn't fully read. Most people in this building, she said carefully, have a hard time remembering that. Mason picked up his toolbox. I'll write up the repair and flag the bracket for a parts replacement. Should hold for now, but it'll come loose again in a month or two if nobody replaces it. Fine. She was already looking back at the screen. Thank you, Mr. Carter. He left. Took the elevator back down to the 14th floor where his supervisor's office was, turned in the work order, and went on to the next ticket. He didn't think much about it. He had 6 more jobs that day and a daughter to pick up from school at 3:15 UHDM. Her name was Lily, and she was 5 years old and absolutely certain she already understood how the world worked. Daddy, did you know that dolphins sleep with one eye open? I did know that. Because they have to keep swimming or they sink. That's sharks, actually. Dolphins breathe air, so they have to stay partly awake to breathe. Lily considered this very seriously from the back seat. That's sad. Maybe they're used to it. Maybe. A pause. What did you fix today? A vent on the top floor? Was it hard? Loose screw. That's easy. Most things are easier than they look, Mason said. Lily hummed in a way that suggested she wasn't fully convinced. She was 5, but she had opinions, firm ones, and she offered them frequently and without much preamble. Mason had been raising her alone for 3 years since her mother left, and he'd learned to appreciate the directness even when it exhausted him. They ate dinner together, pasta with jarred sauce because Mason was a decent enough cook when he had time and a practical one when he didn't, and Lily told him about a disagreement she'd had at school involving a crayon, a drawing of a horse, and a classmate named Trevor who apparently had strong and incorrect views about what color horses could be. He said horses can't be purple, Lily said. Technically, it's my drawing. Technically, he's right about real horses, but it's your drawing. Thank you. She pointed her fork at him. That's what I said. Mason washed dishes while Lily drew at the kitchen table, and he thought about the 42nd floor for the first time since he'd left it. The empty desks, the abandoned coffee mug. The way Vivian Hayes had said most people in this building have a hard time remembering that, like she'd had to remind herself not to expect anything different. He thought about it for a minute. Then he put it away and went to help Lily with her bath. Over the next 2 weeks, Mason was sent to the 42nd floor 4 more times. The vent bracket needed replacing. Then a window seal was flagging a pressure alarm. Then a light fixture in the supply room. Then something with the executive bathroom's water pressure. Each time Vivian was in her office. Each time she acknowledged him without ceremony and went back to whatever she was working on. He didn't try to make conversation. She didn't seem to want it. But he noticed things. The floor was still almost entirely empty. A woman named Patricia had a desk near the far elevator bank and served as some kind of administrative coordinator. Mason saw her a few times, always moving quickly, always looking slightly stressed. There was one other person, a man in his 40s who seemed to float between offices without a fixed desk, and who always appeared to be on a phone call. That was it, as far as Mason could tell. For the executive floor of a company that employed over 2,000 people, the 42nd floor was basically a ghost floor with a very expensive view. On his 4th visit, he arrived just after 7 in the morning to replace the window seal, and Vivian was already at her desk. She was on a video call, and Mason could hear it as he came down the hall. Not her words, but the tone of it, which was clipped and careful in the way of a conversation that was not going well. He stopped outside the double doors, which were cracked open, and knocked lightly. She glanced at him through the crack and held up one finger. He waited in the hallway. The call lasted another 12 minutes. Mason sat on the floor with his back against the wall and looked at his phone and listened to the faint, controlled sound of Vivian Hayes managing something he couldn't identify. Her voice never rose. That was the thing that struck him. Even when whoever was on the other end of the call clearly pushed, her voice stayed level and measured and absolutely sure of itself, like a wall that understood it was a wall and had no interest in pretending otherwise. When she ended the call, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "You can come in." He came in. She was looking out the window at the city, her back to him, her hands loose in her lap. She looked tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with how much you slept. "Window seals on the east side," she said. "I know. I'll be out of your way in 20 minutes. He got to work. After a while, she rolled her chair back from the desk and crossed toward the window on the opposite end from where he was working, stopping where the light came in clearest, and she picked up a tablet from a side table and started reading something. "That call sounded rough," Mason said, and immediately wasn't sure why he'd said it. It wasn't his business. He kept his eyes on the seal and his hands on the tool. A beat of silence. "Quarterly projections," she said finally. "The board wants a restructuring plan. They believe the company is being managed poorly." "Is it?" "No. Flat and certain. But 3 of our largest shareholders have been quietly pushing a narrative that the company is in decline. They want a leadership transition." "They want you gone?" "They want someone who walks through the door," she said quietly, instead of rolling through it. Mason didn't say anything. He worked the seal into place and checked the edges. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment. "That's not right." "No," Vivian said. "It isn't." She looked back at her tablet. "Are you almost done?" "Almost." He finished the job, packed his tools, and said goodbye. She nodded without looking up, and he left. In the elevator going down, Mason stood with his toolbox at his feet and thought about what it costs a person to say a thing like, "They want someone who walks through the door," instead of rolling through it in the same flat, controlled voice you'd use to read off a weather report. He thought it cost quite a lot. The second week of November, Mason's supervisor called him into the small facilities office on the 7th floor and told him the contract with Evercrest was expanding. The building management wanted to bring the maintenance crew fully in-house as part of a cost consolidation effort, and Mason was being offered a permanent position. Better pay, benefits, real ones, set, health coverage, which he needed because Lily had developed a recurring ear infection situation that her pediatrician was describing as something they'd monitor. He took the job. His supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Gerald, who communicated primarily through sighs and hand gestures, walked him through the updated assignment rotation. Mason would continue covering general building maintenance on floors 10 through 30, plus, and Gerald said this with the specific exhaustion of someone who had been dealing with a particular headache for a long time, the 42nd floor. "What's the situation up there?" Mason asked. Gerald looked at him over his reading glasses. "What do you mean?" "There are almost no people up there. Half the offices look like they've been cleared out." Gerald sighed the sigh of someone who had not been consulted about certain decisions and resented this. "Ms. Hayes's direct staff has had a lot of turnover," he said, choosing his words with the care of a man near retirement who understood which things were worth stepping in. "If you're assigned to 42, you show up, you do your work, you don't get involved in whatever else is going on up there. Clear?" "Clear," Mason said. He thought about the empty desks, the abandoned coffee mug. Patricia, always moving too fast, always looking like she was trying to be in 3 places at once to cover for the people who weren't there anymore. He thought about turnover and what that word meant when it happened over and over on the floor where one person worked alone. The first time he understood how bad it really was came on a Thursday in the middle of November. He'd been sent up to check a door hinge on one of the interior conference rooms, a 10-minute job. When he stepped off the elevator, Patricia was standing at the reception desk with a phone pressed to her ear and the look of someone trying very hard not to come apart in a professional setting. She saw Mason and put her hand over the phone. "If you're here for the conference room, it's the second door on the left," she said. "And if you see Ms. Hayes, please don't mention the time." "The time?" "It's 4:30. Mason looked at her. "She got in at 5 this morning," Patricia said, and then went back to the call. He fixed the hinge. On his way back down the hall, the double doors to Vivian's office were open for once, and he could see her at her desk. Not the controlled, composed version of her he'd seen before, but something rawer than that. She was on the phone, and she had her free hand pressed flat against the desk like she needed the physical contact with something solid. Her laptop showed a spreadsheet that covered the entire screen in numbers too small to read from the doorway. On the corner of the desk, right beside her elbow, was a coffee cup that had clearly been refilled multiple times and was now empty. and on the small console table beside the window, the one where she kept the tablet, there was a plate with an untouched sandwich, the plastic wrap still on it. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. The sandwich looked like it had been there since morning. Mason didn't stop. He went to the elevator and went back down to Gerald's office. "The executive floor," he said. Gerald looked up from his desk. "Next time there's a ticket up there, I want it in my rotation." Gerald studied him for a moment. "It usually goes to whoever's available." "I know," Mason said. "I'm saying I want it in my regular rotation. Consistent. Same person going up there, so if something needs follow-up, there's continuity." Gerald considered this with the expression of a man trying to figure out if he was being handed something convenient or something problematic. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll put your name on the floor assignment." Mason nodded. He picked up his toolbox and went to the next job. Bucket. Through December, he developed a quiet and unremarkable routine. He showed up each morning, worked his regular rotation, and made sure that at least once a day there was a reason to be on the 42nd floor. If there wasn't a maintenance ticket, he invented adjacent reasons. A check on the HVAC panel, a walkthrough of the emergency lighting system, small preventative maintenance things that needed doing anyway, but that he started scheduling for that floor specifically. He brought an extra coffee up with him every morning. Not as a gesture, not as a thing to hand her or make anything of. He just set it on the counter of the small kitchenette near the elevator bank, where whoever came in first could take it. Patricia usually grabbed it. Sometimes Vivian did. He stocked the kitchenette with better coffee than the standard building supply, paying for it himself, which was a mildly ridiculous thing to do and which he didn't mention to anyone. He fixed things before they were broken, which was technically what the job was supposed to be anyway. And he paid attention. He noticed that Vivian ate irregularly, sometimes not until mid-afternoon if a series of meetings stacked up. He noticed that the building's intercom system had a delay on the 42nd floor that meant she sometimes didn't get announcements in time. He fixed the delay without being asked. He noticed that the angle of her desk put afternoon sun directly in her eyes, and that she'd positioned a small plant in an attempt to block it, which wasn't really working. He adjusted the window shade system so it could be set to a partial close without triggering the full room darkening mode. He didn't tell her he'd done most of these things. That wasn't the point. The point, if Mason was honest with himself, and he tried to be, it was a thing he'd worked on over the 3 years of raising Lily alone and being the only adult in the room at all times, was simpler than it looked. He'd watched his daughter navigate a world that was frequently unkind to her for reasons that had nothing to do with her. He'd watched people overlook her, underestimate her, talk around her. And he'd learned slowly and with some difficulty that the most useful thing you could do for someone the world was failing wasn't to make a speech about it. It was just to stay. It was to be the person who was still there when the speech was over and the sentiment had faded and the practical reality of Tuesday morning was still sitting there waiting to be dealt with. He wasn't sure Vivian Hayes needed anyone to tell her she deserved better. She was very clearly aware of that. What he wasn't sure she had anymore was someone who'd just show up, do the next thing, not make a whole production out of it. So that's what he did. He showed up. He fixed the things that were broken. He went home to Lily, who had moved on from purple horses to an elaborate series of drawings she was calling the Dolphin Investigation, and who told him very seriously one evening that she thought dolphins might actually be fine about the eye-open sleeping thing. "Maybe they like it," she said. "Maybe," Mason said, "maybe it's nice to always be able to see a little bit of what's around you." He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "maybe it is." January came in cold and gray, the kind of cold that settled into the bones of old buildings and made pipes contract overnight and expansion joints tick and groan in the walls like the building was talking to itself. Mason spent the first week of the new year dealing with a busted heating coil on the 23rd floor and a pressure valve that had crept out of spec on the main water line running through floors 8 through 15, and it was the kind of relentless, unglamorous work that reminded him why he'd gone into maintenance in the first place. Not because it was exciting, but because it was honest. Something broke. You found the break. You fixed it. The result was visible and immediate and real. He'd had jobs before that didn't work that way. Jobs where you put in 8 hours and couldn't point to a single concrete thing you'd produced, and those jobs had made him feel hollow in a way he couldn't fully explain to anyone who hadn't felt it. This job didn't do that. He made it to the 42nd floor on a Tuesday afternoon to check the HVAC panel. Genuinely, this time, not an invented reason. The system had flagged an airflow irregularity on the building's monitoring software. He stepped off the elevator and almost walked into Patricia, who was moving fast with a stack of folders pressed against her chest and the expression of someone who had been running on too little sleep for too many consecutive days. "Mr. Carter," she adjusted the folders. "Panel's probably the north unit. It's been cycling funny since this morning." "I'll check it." He looked at her. "You doing all right?" Patricia laughed, the short, tired laugh of someone who's past the point of pretending. "We lost Deanna on Friday." He didn't know who Deanna was. "Executive coordinator," Patricia said, reading his expression. "She'd been here 8 months, left for a position at a smaller firm." A pause, something complicated moving across her face. Said the atmosphere here was, and I'm quoting, "not sustainable." "I'm sorry." "It's fine, I'll cover." She said it with the conviction of someone who had said it enough times that it had stopped meaning anything. "It's always fine." She moved past him and disappeared into one of the side offices, and Mason stood in the hallway for a moment before going to find the North HVAC unit. The airflow irregularity turned out to be a partially blocked filter, a 20-minute fix, straightforward, and he was still up on the access ladder when he heard Vivian's office door open and the quiet hum of her chair moving down the hall. He heard her stop somewhere below and behind him. "Blocked filter?" she asked. "Yeah, should have been caught on the last maintenance cycle. I'll flag it in the log so it gets checked monthly." "Everything all right otherwise? On the system?" "Looks like it." He pulled the old filter free and bagged it. Airflow should normalize within an hour. He climbed down the ladder and found her positioned a few feet back, looking up at the access panel with the particular focus of someone who'd taught herself to understand the mechanical systems of the building she occupied because no one else was going to do it for her. She had a tablet in her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. "Patricia told me about Deanna," Mason said. Vivian's expression didn't change much. "She found a better situation." That's one way to put it. It's the accurate way. She looked at him then. "People leave jobs every day, Mr. Carter. It's not unusual." "How many coordinators have you gone through in the last 2 years?" A beat of silence. He was aware that it might have been too direct a question. But she didn't look offended, exactly. She looked like someone who was deciding whether to answer honestly or deflect, and watching her work through that decision was interesting because he could see it happening. The small tightening around her eyes, the way her chin lifted slightly. 6, she said. 6 coordinators. And 4 executive assistants. 2 chiefs of staff. 11 senior department liaisons. She said it without inflection, like she was reading inventory. "I've stopped counting the junior staff." Mason installed the new filter and latched the access panel closed. "And none of them left because of the work?" he said. Not accusing, just asking. "Some left because of the work," she said, "but mostly they left because standing next to me comes with a target on your back. The people who are trying to push me out of this company don't limit their pressure to me. They go after anyone who appears loyal." She turned the tablet over in her lap. "After a while, most people decide it's not worth it." He folded the ladder. "But you're still here." "It's my company." "I know." He looked at her. "I'm just saying, you're still here." She seemed to consider that for a moment. Then she said, "The panel will need to be checked again in 30 days, and rolled back toward her office. "I'll put it in the calendar," Mason said. February. The board of directors held a quarterly review meeting on the 41st floor, one floor down from Vivian's office, which Mason had come to understand was not an accident. The board held its meetings on 41 because 3 of its 7 members had quietly made clear they were uncomfortable meeting on the same floor as Vivian unless the agenda specifically required it. He heard this from Patricia, who heard it from building management, who heard it from the events coordinator who'd been tasked with booking the rooms. On the morning of the review, Mason came in early and found the 42nd floor quieter than usual, which was saying something. Patricia wasn't at her desk yet. The other man, whose name Mason had learned was Douglas, and who served as some kind of investor relations intermediary, was nowhere to be seen. The floor was still and dim, the overhead lighting on its automatic morning schedule just starting to brighten. Vivian was already in her office. She was at the window, not at her desk, which was unusual. She was positioned in front of the glass with the city laid out below her in the flat gray light of early morning, and she had a coffee cup in one hand and she was just looking, not at anything specific, just out. Mason knocked on the open door. She turned. "Early," he said. "I'm always early." A pause. "Come in if you need to be here." "Just doing the morning walkthrough." He stepped inside. "Board meeting today." 41. "Yes." She looked back at the window. "They'll recommend a transition plan, a phased leadership shift, probably propose a co-CEO structure, which is the polite version of saying they want someone else to take over while I'm still here to make the optics work." "Are they going to get what they want?" She was quiet for a moment. "Not today," she said. "Good." She looked at him sideways. "You say that with a lot of confidence for someone who doesn't know anything about corporate governance." "I don't need to know anything about corporate governance," Mason said. "I know when something's being done wrong." She considered him. Outside, the city was starting to catch light along the upper edges of the taller buildings, that early winter light that was thin and cold but present. "My father built this company," Vivian said, and it was the first time she'd volunteered anything personal. Her voice was even, but it was the evenness of something held in place rather than something naturally calm. 31 years ago, started with 12 employees and a contract to supply component parts to 3 regional manufacturers. He spent 20 years building it into something real. She turned the coffee cup in her hand. He died 4 years ago. Left it to me. I'd been his second in command for 6 years by then, so the transition wasn't supposed to be complicated. "The accident," Mason said, 8 months after he died. She nodded. "A driver ran a red light on Meridian Avenue. I was in the back seat. My spine was compressed at the T10 vertebra. The surgeons said I'd likely never walk again, and they were right." She said it the same way she said everything, direct, stripped of drama. "I was in rehab for 7 months. When I came back, half the executive team had quietly begun positioning for a new structure that didn't include me in a leadership role. Half the team. The other half resigned rather than participate in the maneuvering." She almost smiled, but it was a tired version, which sounds loyal until you realize that leaving is just a different kind of abandonment. Mason sat down in one of the chairs across from her desk, the ones that were clearly intended for guests and rarely used. He sat down because the conversation felt like the kind that didn't work if one person was standing and the other wasn't. "How'd you hold on?" he asked. "I held on because the legal structure of the company gave me controlling interest, and because my father was meticulous about paperwork." She rolled back to her desk and set the coffee cup down. "Not because of loyalty. Not because people fought for me. Because the documents said I was in charge, and even the people trying to move me out understood that overriding that was going to be a long, expensive, very public fight." She looked at the desk. "I've been winning on paperwork for 3 years. At some point, paperwork stops being enough." Mason didn't say anything. He'd learned in the past 2 months that there were things Vivian said that weren't invitations for a response. They were just things she needed to put somewhere outside herself for a moment. "The meeting's at 9, she said. "I'll be out of the way." "You're not in the way." He looked at her. She was already opening her laptop, pulling up whatever she needed to pull up, making herself ready for the day in the way she did every morning, this quiet and thorough process of arming herself for whatever was coming. "Is Patricia in yet?" she asked without looking up. "I didn't see her." "She'll be late. Her son had a thing at school this morning." A pause. "She always comes in on time and then kills herself catching up on what she missed. I keep telling her the morning isn't critical, but she doesn't listen. She's trying to be reliable. I know. I appreciate it." Vivian looked up briefly. "I appreciate it, and I never say so enough, which is a failing I'm aware of." Mason stood. "I'll start the walkthrough." "There's coffee in the kitchenette. Good coffee, not the building supply." She looked back at her screen. "Someone's been stocking it for the past 2 months. I don't know who, but it's considerably better than what facilities provides. Mason walked to the door. Good luck with the board, he said. She didn't look up. I don't need luck. He almost said, I know, but he let it go. Patricia arrived 12 minutes later, slightly out of breath, with her coat half off and a bag over one shoulder. Mason was in the side hall checking the emergency lighting panel, and she nearly walked past him before she registered he was there. Morning, she said, pulling her coat the rest of the way off. Morning? How's your son? She stopped. She told you about that? She mentioned it, said it was a school thing. Patricia looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between surprise and something softer. He had a presentation, first grade, he was nervous. She hung her coat on the wall hook. She knew about it because I mentioned it weeks ago, completely in passing. I didn't think she'd remember. She pays attention, Mason said. I know she does. Patricia smoothed her jacket. People think she's cold. She's not cold, she's got all these walls. She lowered her voice, though there was no one else within hearing distance. She's had to build them, you understand? You can't watch everyone leave and not build something. Mason closed the lighting panel and marked it in his log. How long have you been here? He asked. 3 years, since right after the accident. Patricia's mouth tightened. I was the 4th admin they hired after she came back. The first 3 lasted a combined total of about 14 weeks. What happened to them? Pressure. Mostly from outside the department, sometimes from the board. People in this company who wanted the transition to happen started making it very clear that being associated with Vivian Hayes was professionally inconvenient. She said it matter-of-factly. 2 of them had families to worry about. Good offers came along. I understood. But you stayed. I stayed because she never once asked me to. Patricia looked at him steadily. She never guilt-tripped me, never made me feel obligated, never manipulated me into staying. She just kept showing up every morning and doing her work, and there was something about that I couldn't walk away from. A pause. That probably sounds naive. No, Mason said. It doesn't. Patricia picked up her bag. The board meeting's going to run until at least noon. She won't eat anything until it's over unless someone brings something to the conference room, which she'll refuse, and then she'll be running on coffee until 2 in the afternoon and wondering why she has a headache. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small paper sack, something from the bakery on the corner, by the look of the logo. I bring 2, one for her and one that I tell her is for me, so she doesn't feel like I'm taking care of her. Mason looked at the bag. That's a good system, he said. It works. She headed down the hall. She's proud. Nothing wrong with pride, but it does complicate the caretaking. The board meeting ended at 12:40. Mason knew because he was in the service corridor on 41 running a check on the plumbing stack when he heard the elevator doors and the sound of voices carrying the particular flat energy of a meeting that had produced decisions nobody was happy with. He didn't hear the words, but the tone was clear enough. He was back on 42 by 2 o'clock. Vivian's office door was closed. Patricia was at her desk, typing fast, and she shook her head slightly when she saw him look toward the door. He went to work on the window alignment in the empty conference room at the end of the hall, and he was there for 40 minutes before he heard the door open. He heard the chair. He heard her stop somewhere in the hall. Then he heard her say, directed at Patricia, "Get me Daniel Yu at Praxis Capital, not his assistant. Him." He might not pick up. He'll pick up. A pause. They proposed the co-CEO structure, Vivian said, and her voice was not broken, nothing like that, but thinner than usual, thinner in the way that wood gets thin right before it gives. 3-4 in favor. Clement abstained. Nguyen voted no. That's a formal proposal? It goes to a full board vote in 60 days. A pause. I have 60 days to change 3 votes or demonstrate performance metrics significant enough that the proposal becomes politically untenable. Mason stayed where he was, not moving, not wanting to intrude on something that wasn't his. Okay, Patricia said. Okay, what do you need? Daniel Yu, and pull me the last 4 quarters of operational performance against projections, and a silence. I need about 20 minutes first. Take whatever you need. He heard the chair move back toward the office. The door didn't close this time. Mason finished with the window alignment and came back down the hall. He could see Vivian through the doorway. At the window again, same position as that morning, city below her, coffee cup gone, hands in her lap. He stopped at the kitchenette, made a fresh cup of coffee, the good kind, and walked to the door of her office and set it on the console table just inside without going in. She didn't turn around. "Thank you," she said. He went back to his rotation. But March arrived and the days got marginally longer and the city started to look less like a black and white photograph of itself. Mason picked Lily up from school every afternoon and listened to the ongoing saga of Trevor, who had apparently evolved from adversary to tentative friend over the course of the winter, a development Lily described with the cautious optimism of a diplomat, reporting from a still unstable region. "He shared his markers today," she told Mason. "That's progress." "The purple one." She looked out the window of the car with a grave expression. "I think he was trying to say sorry about the horse." "Probably a good interpretation." "I accepted it," she said, "but I told him he had to try my way of drawing horses first before he decided they had to be a certain color." "And?" "He drew a blue one." A pause. "It was pretty good." Mason smiled at the road. "Open-mindedness is underrated." "What does that mean?" "It means being willing to try the thing you think you already know the answer to." Lily thought about this. "Like when you made me try the soup even though I said I didn't like soup?" "Yeah, like that. I still don't like soup." "Fair enough." She fell asleep before they got home, the way she did sometimes, out cold with her head against the car door in 30 seconds flat, and Mason carried her inside and got her settled on the couch and sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and thought about Vivian Hayes' 60 days. He thought about what 60 days meant to a person who had been fighting the same fight for 3 years. Not with any particular plan forming in his head, he wasn't the kind of person who confused caring about something with having authority over it. He was a maintenance worker. He knew what he was. But he also knew what he'd seen on that floor for the past 3 months. And what he'd seen was a person carrying a weight that had been getting heavier as the people around her quietly peeled away, and he thought about what that does to a person over time. Not the dramatic version of it, not the kind of breaking that makes a good story. The slow version. The version where you get up every morning and do the work and hold yourself together and go home alone and do it again, and gradually the effort of holding yourself together starts to take up so much of your available energy that there's less and less left for everything else. He'd been through a version of that himself after Lily's mother left. It was a thing he didn't talk about because talking about it served no particular purpose, but he recognized the shape of it in other people. He recognized it in Vivian. The week before the 60-day mark, Mason noticed something new. He'd been doing his regular morning walkthrough. It was a Friday, cold still, the building's heating system running hard. And when he came up to 42, there were 3 boxes in the hallway outside 2 of the empty offices. Not moving boxes, exactly. More like clearing out boxes, the kind with a few things dropped loosely inside them, the residual remains of a workspace being vacated. He stopped and looked at them. Douglas appeared from one of the offices with his coat on and a bag over his shoulder. The 2 men looked at each other. "Leaving?" Mason asked. Douglas looked uncomfortable in a way that expressed itself as a kind of reflexive defensiveness. "Took a position at a firm in Seattle. Better opportunity." "Good for you," Mason said, and meant it neutrally. Douglas hesitated. He looked like he was going to say something else, something that would explain or justify or position the departure in a more favorable light. Then he seemed to decide against it. "She's going to lose this," he said quietly. "The board vote's going to go against her. Everyone who's been paying attention knows it. I've got a kid in college and another one going in 2 years. He looked at the boxes. I don't have anything against her. I think what they're doing is wrong, but I can't stake my career on a fight I don't think she can win." Mason nodded. "I understand," he said. "You don't have the same risk exposure I do," Douglas said, a little sharper now, as if he'd taken the nod as judgment. "Your facilities, nobody's coming after the maintenance guy." "I know." Douglas picked up one of the boxes. "She'll be fine. She's tougher than anyone in this building gives her credit for. Yeah, Mason said. She is. Douglas left. Mason stood in the hallway and looked at the two empty offices, which were now officially empty rather than just mostly empty, and then he went to find Patricia. She was at her desk. She'd clearly already seen the boxes. I know, she said before he could say anything. You okay? No. She put both hands flat on the desk. I'm angry. I'm angry because Douglas isn't a bad person. He's just scared, and I don't know what to do with angry at someone who's scared. She took a breath. She doesn't know yet. He sent her an email this morning instead of telling her in person. She's been in back-to-back calls since 7, so she hasn't seen it. Mason looked toward the closed office door. Has she eaten anything? He asked. Patricia looked at him. After a moment, something in her expression shifted. Not quite grateful, but close to it. The expression of someone who was very tired of being the only person asking that question. I brought a muffin. It's still on the console table. I'll check the HVAC. He went in through the access hallway rather than the main door and spent 20 minutes on the north unit that didn't need checking. And when he came back through the main hall, he could see through the door's side panel that Vivian had her headset on and was talking, but at some point she'd moved to the window. That same spot, the same posture, the city below her. And the muffin was still on the console table, untouched. He went to the kitchenette and heated it up. He set it on the console table in place of the cold one and left the cold one in the kitchenette in case Patricia wanted it. He didn't see whether she ate it. He went back downstairs. He fixed a refrigerant line on the 14th floor and replaced a cracked light switch cover on the 20th and calibrated a humidity sensor on the 27th. At 4:15, his phone rang, and it was Lily's school saying she'd complained of an earache and was in the nurse's office, and he packed up his tools and told his supervisor he was leaving early and went to get her. She was fine. Not the infection again, just a cold settling in, nothing serious, but she was grumpy and unhappy in the specific way of a small person who was unwell and not being reasonable about it. And she didn't want soup, and she didn't want juice, and she didn't want to watch television. She just wanted to be held. And so Mason sat on the couch for 2 hours with his daughter, leaning against his side while she drifted in and out of a light sleep. And he thought about the 42nd floor, and the muffin, and the city below the window, and the woman who spent every day fighting a war by herself that she shouldn't have been fighting alone. He thought, something's got to change. Not a dramatic thought, not a plan. Just a feeling, sitting there quiet and certain in his chest. The kind of feeling that arrives before you know what to do with it and stays there waiting. The following Monday, Mason asked Gerald to add the 42nd floor to his permanent daily assignment, not as a secondary rotation, as a primary. Gerald looked at him over the reading glasses. Daily, Gerald said. Daily. There's not enough regular maintenance volume on one floor to justify daily visits. I'll document everything, Mason said. Preventative checks, system calibrations, the lighting and climate controls are old and they run hard. I'll keep a maintenance log that'll hold up to any review. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. He was a practical man, not a sentimental one, and Mason respected that about him. He wasn't going to be moved by anything abstract. Facilities management has been getting pressure from building ownership about the executive floor, Gerald said finally. Apparently there have been concerns about upkeep, understaffing on that floor's maintenance rotation. He looked at his desk. I'll tell ownership we've assigned a dedicated tech. That works, Mason said. Don't make this complicated, Gerald said. Do your job. That's all. That's all I'm doing, Mason said. He went upstairs. The floor was quiet. Patricia was at her desk. Vivian's door was closed. The two empty offices that Douglas had vacated were still dark, their doors standing slightly open on nothing. Mason hung up his jacket in the supply room, poured a coffee from the good machine, sat down at the small work table in the supply room, and opened his maintenance log. He wrote, Monday, full system check 42nd floor, starting with HVAC calibration, proceeding to electrical panel, emergency lighting, plumbing stack pressure, window seals east side. He looked at what he'd written. Then he wrote, underneath, floor currently operating with reduced staff. Will note any facility needs that arise as personnel situation develops. It was nothing, It was just words in a log that nobody would read, but he meant it, and that was enough for him. He closed the log, picked up his toolbox, and went to start the day. The board vote was scheduled for the third Thursday of April, and as that date moved closer on the calendar, the 42nd floor began to feel the way the air feels before a storm. Not visibly different, not something you could point to and name, but present in the body in a way that made people move a little faster and speak a little more carefully and look at their phones more than they needed to. Mason felt it. Patricia felt it visibly in the way she'd started arriving earlier and leaving later and eating lunch at her desk with a sandwich held in one hand while she typed with the other. Even the building itself seemed to register something. The heating system ran harder in April than the temperatures warranted, as if the structure was compensating for something, and Mason found himself doing longer walkthroughs than usual, checking things he'd already checked, staying on the floor longer than his log strictly justified. He told himself it was thoroughness. He was mostly honest with himself about what it actually was. Vivian, for her part, showed none of it. That was the thing about her that Mason had come to understand over the past 3 months. Not admire exactly, though he did admire it, but understand the way you understand something with cost attached to it. She had a capacity for stillness under pressure that looked like calm but wasn't. Calm was the absence of turbulence. What Vivian had was more like a decision, made somewhere deep and renewed daily, to not let the turbulence be visible. It required constant energy. Mason could see the expenditure of it in small ways. The set of her shoulders at the end of a long call, the particular quality of her silence after a difficult meeting, the way she sometimes sat at the window in the mornings for longer than seemed warranted before she turned back to the desk. She was spending something that wasn't being replenished, and the rate of spending was increasing. On the Tuesday before the vote, Mason came up in the morning to find the floor empty. Not just quieter than usual, empty. Patricia's desk was abandoned with her computer still running. The lights in the side offices were off. Even the background hum of the floor felt different, thinner. He went to the kitchenette first. The coffee hadn't been made. He made it. Then he went down the hall toward the supply room, and that's when he heard it. Not a voice, not anything dramatic, just a sound from the stairwell door on the far end of the hall, the one that led to the service stairs. A door opened and closed. Footsteps in the hall. Then Vivian came around the corner in her chair, moving at the pace she moved when something was wrong, which was faster than her usual pace and with less of her usual attention paid to the people she passed. She didn't have her jacket. She had her phone in her hand, and she was reading something on the screen, and the line of her jaw was doing something Mason had not seen it do before, which was a kind of controlled tension that was very close to breaking. She looked up and saw him. "Patricia called in," she said. "Her son is sick." "Okay. I have a 9 o'clock with the Harmon group, and the video conference system in the main conference room isn't working." Mason was already moving. "I'll look at it." "It was working yesterday. Something probably cycled off overnight. Give me 10 minutes. The conference room system turned out to be a network authentication issue. Not hardware. Someone in IT had pushed a firmware update overnight that dropped the room's credentials. It took Mason 14 minutes to reach the right person in IT and talk them through a remote fix, and he was aware the entire time of the clock moving toward 9 and of Vivian at her desk 40 feet away, preparing for a meeting that mattered. The system came back online at 8:52. He went to her office door. "You're good." She was already gathering her things. "Thank you." 8 minutes. She looked up. "I know what time it is, Mr. Carter." "Right." He stepped back. "Sorry." She stopped. "No, She pressed her lips together briefly. "I didn't mean that as sharply as it came out. It's fine." "It's not, actually." She set her folder down. "You fixed the problem and told me it was fixed, and I was rude because I'm—" A pause. "I'm managing a number of things this morning." "I know." "I don't always handle it well." "Nobody does," Mason said. "You do better than most." She looked at him for a moment. "That's a low bar." "Maybe. Still counts." Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, but the thing that lived next to a smile. Then she picked up her folder again and went to the conference room, and Mason went back to the kitchenette and poured 2 cups of coffee and set one outside the conference room door. When the meeting ended 90 minutes later, the cup was gone. So, Patricia came back Wednesday. She looked tired and grateful and brought Mason a sandwich from the bakery on the corner, which she set on his work table in the supply room without comment, and he ate it and didn't make a thing of it, which seemed to be what she wanted. She told me about the conference system, Patricia said, leaning against the doorframe. She said you fixed it in under 15 minutes. 14. She said under 15 like it was. Patricia shook her head. I've been here 3 years and I've never heard her describe something another person did in a way that suggested she was impressed. Mason shrugged. It was a firmware issue. It wasn't complicated. I know that. That's not what I mean. Patricia looked at him steadily. She doesn't trust people easily. You've been up here every day for 3 months, and You're different. I'm the maintenance guy. Stop saying that like it explains something. Mason picked up his toolbox. What's the situation with the vote? Patricia's expression shifted. She got Clement. He was the abstainer. She spent 3 weeks finding the right angle, and she got him. So it's 4-3 against, which is still against. She crossed her arms. She needs one more. Probably Harrington. He's been the most principled of the opposition, which means he's movable if the argument is right. Does she have the argument? She has the performance data. Third quarter numbers came in strong, operational efficiency, up 11% year over year. It's a real case. Patricia looked at the floor. Whether Harrington reads it that way is something she can't control, and Vivian doesn't handle uncertainty about things she can't control very well. Who does? Fair point. She straightened up. The vote's in 2 days, Mr. Carter. I know. I don't know what's going to happen. Neither do I, Mason said. But she'll be here either way. She's not going anywhere. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, and went back to her desk. Thursday arrived cold and overcast, the kind of April day that had forgotten it was April. And Mason came in an hour early and made coffee and did a full walkthrough of the floor's systems and found everything functioning normally, which felt almost strange. All the machinery running correctly on a day when everything else felt like it was balanced on an edge. The board met at 10. Same room, 41, same flat light energy filtering up through the building in the way that atmosphere moved through structures when something important was happening. Not literally, not really, but Mason felt it anyway. That particular quality of waiting that made small tasks feel very small. He replaced a light switch in the supply room. He recalibrated the east side thermostat. He tightened a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchenette that had been loose for 2 weeks and that he'd been putting off because it was a 30-second job and sometimes you saved the easy ones. At 11:45, the elevator opened and 3 board members came out. Not to this floor by design, Mason guessed, but the elevator panel had been recently serviced, and sometimes those old panels got confused about which floor they were registered to. The 3 men looked at Mason with the particular blankness of people who are accustomed to not knowing the names of the people who maintained their environments. He nodded. They waited for the next elevator. At 12:20, Patricia's phone rang. Mason was in the hall when it happened, and he saw her pick it up, and her face went very still, and he knew before she said anything that it hadn't gone the right way. She hung up. She sat for a moment, then she picked the phone back up and knocked on Vivian's door and went in. Mason went to the supply room. He sat at the work table. He could hear faintly the sound of voices from the office, but not words, just the texture of a conversation that was bad and being handled carefully. After a while, Patricia came out. She walked to the kitchenette and stood there with her back to the hall, and Mason could see from the set of her shoulders that she was holding herself together with effort. 4-3, she said when he came in. He stood next to her. Harrington voted with the majority, she said. The co-CEO provision passes. They have 60 days to identify a candidate, and then it goes to implementation. Mason said nothing. She doesn't lose the company, Patricia said, and he could tell she was trying to locate the thing that was still intact. She's still CEO. She's still in control of day-to-day operations. But they'll appoint someone alongside her, and that someone will have equal authority, and everyone in this building knows what that means within a year. She turned on the tap and filled a glass of water and drank half of it. It means she loses. It means she hasn't won yet, Mason said. Patricia looked at him. You sound very calm about this. I'm not particularly calm. I'm just. He thought about how to say it. This isn't over. Mason. She said his first name, the first time she'd done that in 3 months. She's been fighting this for 3 years. She's been fighting alone for most of it, and she just lost the vote she needed to win to make fighting viable. She set the glass down. I know you want this to be a moment where it turns around. I want that too. But I've been here a long time, and I know what the math looks like. The math changes. On what basis? On the basis that she's still here, he said, and she's still right, and that has to count for something eventually. Patricia studied him for a long moment, then she let out a slow breath. I need to get back to her, she said. I'll be here, he said. She went. Mason stood in the kitchenette and looked at the city out the small window above the counter, a sliver of it, just the tops of buildings and a gray sky. And he thought about what Patricia had said. She's been fighting alone for most of it. He thought about what that did to a person, structurally, over time. Not the dramatic version, not the breaking, the slow version, the way a building handles a load that slightly exceeds its design spec. It doesn't collapse immediately. It shifts. It transfers the stress. It finds new pathways until eventually some part of the system is carrying far more than it should. And that part starts to show the strain, and the rest of the structure doesn't even know it yet. He went back to his work. There was nothing else to do. The weeks after the vote were different in a way that was hard to name. Vivian was still there. She was still in the office before everyone else, and still on her last call when Mason was finishing his end-of-day walkthrough. She was still organized, still precise, still the best prepared person in any room she entered. But there was something in her daily rhythm that had altered slightly. A flatness to the pauses, a quality to the silence in her office between calls that was different from the silence he'd gotten used to. Not despair, exactly. More like conservation. Like she'd restructured her spending in response to a loss she hadn't fully accounted for yet. He kept showing up. He kept doing his job. He kept the coffee stocked and the systems calibrated and the small problems solved before they became medium problems, and he didn't make any of it into a thing. One evening in mid-April, he came back to the floor at 6:15 to retrieve a tool he'd left in the supply room, and he found Vivian in the hall. Not in her office. In the hall, positioned near the window at the end where on a clear day you could see all the way to the river. The sky was doing something complicated in the west, all orange and deep gray. The kind of sunset that stopped you even when you didn't have time to be stopped by it. She didn't hear him at first. He saw her before she registered him. Just her, alone in the long hallway, looking out at the sky with an expression he wasn't sure he was supposed to see. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more exposed than that. More like whatever she looked like when there was no one around to look like anything for. He made a slight noise with his toolbox. She turned. Left a crescent wrench in the supply room, he said. She nodded. Neither of them addressed the moment. He got the wrench and came back. She was still at the window. It was a good sunset, he said. Yes. She looked back at the fading colors. My father used to say that the only honest thing about office buildings is the view. Smart man. He was. A pause. He was also stubborn and occasionally impossible, and he never apologized for anything in his life, so. She said it the way you say things about people you loved who had real flaws and left anyway. He would have handled this better than I have. You don't know that. He never lost a board vote. He also built the company before there was a board to lose to, Mason said. Different problem set. She was quiet for a moment. That's a fair point. He shifted the toolbox. I should get going. Lily has a thing tonight. What kind of thing? He almost deflected. Then, her school does this thing every month. Parents come in, kids show what they've been working on. She's been doing these drawings. She calls it the dolphin investigation. I still don't fully understand it, but she's put a lot of work in. Something in Vivian's expression changed in a way that was small but genuine. How old is she? 5, almost 6. What does the dolphin investigation involve? As far as I can tell, it's an ongoing attempt to understand whether dolphins are okay with the sleeping situation they have, the one eye open thing. Has she reached a conclusion? Current position is that they've adapted, and it might actually be an advantage." He paused. "I think she might be processing something through the dolphins, but I haven't figured out what yet." "Children do that," Vivian said. "They work things out in the third person before they can do it directly." "Do adults?" She looked at him. "Sometimes." He nodded. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Good night, Mr. Carter." He went to the elevator. When the doors opened, he looked back. She was still at the window, the last of the orange light on the buildings outside going gray, the city settling into evening around her. The sabotage happened on a Wednesday night in the last week of April. Mason found out about it at 11:43 p.m. when his phone rang and the caller ID said Evercrest Building Management. He answered. It was the overnight facilities coordinator, a young man named Bryce who handled the building after hours and who had never called Mason before. His voice was the voice of someone trying very hard to sound in control of a situation that was not in control. "We've got a situation on 42, Bryce said, and 39, and we're getting alerts from multiple floors." Mason was already sitting up. "What kind of alerts?" "Network alerts first, then the building management system started throwing errors, and about 20 minutes ago we lost climate control on 8 floors. But the main thing is, someone got into the operations server room." "On 42? Sublevel 2. The operations server room handles the entire executive floor's data infrastructure." A pause, long enough that Mason could hear Bryce's breathing. "The server logs are showing access by a credential that's been inactive for 16 months. And Ms. Hayes, I called her. She's on her way in." Mason looked at the clock. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "You don't have to?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Mason said. He called his downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who had watched Lily before in emergencies, and who answered the phone with the equanimity of a woman who had raised 6 children and considered midnight calls a normal feature of life. She was at Mason's door in 4 minutes. He was out the door in 5. He made it to the building in 18 minutes. The lobby was lit up and wrong. 2 of the overhead systems had failed, throwing the big open space into a patchwork of working and non-working lights. The security desk manned by a guard who looked like someone had just told him his retirement plan was invalid. The elevators were running on backup power, which meant they were slow and logged every trip. Mason badged in and took the elevator to the sublevel first. The server room door was hanging open, which it should never be, and the room inside was blinking with red fault indicators on 3 of the main racks. A man from IT named Garrett was in there already, typing fast, swearing under his breath in the continuous low tone of someone who needed the sound of their own voice to stay focused. "Talk to me," Mason said. "Someone used an old admin credential to access the primary network stack," Garrett said without looking up. "Pushed a command package that triggered a cascade failure across the executive data tier. Client-facing systems aren't down, but the internal operation systems are. Financial modeling, the performance database, the board reporting system." He glanced over his shoulder. "The vote documentation for the co-CEO implementation. All of it's locked behind an encryption wrapper we did not put there." Mason stared at him. "Someone locked the board documentation." "Someone locked everything." Garrett turned back to the screen. "And the encryption key isn't in any system I can find." Mason went to the elevator and rode up to 42. The floor was dim when he stepped off. The climate control failure had dropped the temperature noticeably, and the overhead system was running on partial power, every other light working. The effect was unsettling, the familiar hallway cut into strips of light and shadow. Vivian was already there. She was at her desk with 2 laptops open and her phone to her ear, and she looked up when Mason came through the door, and there was something in her face he'd never seen before. Not panic. She wasn't panicking, but something close to the place panic lives. A rawness. A crack in the surface of the control she maintained with such consistent and exhausting effort. She held up a finger. He waited. She finished the call, set the phone down, looked at him. "You came in," she said. "Bryce called me." "It's past midnight." "I know what time it is, Ms. Hayes," he said gently, the echo of her own words from earlier in the month. Something passed across her face. She looked back at her screen. "The operation systems are down. The board implementation documents are locked. The investors are going to get wind of this by morning, and the narrative is going to be that the company's infrastructure has been compromised under my leadership." She said it in the flat, inventory-reading tone he knew well, But underneath it, he could hear something else now, something that had been quiet for months and was no longer entirely quiet. This is coordinated. The credential that was used belonged to one of my former chiefs of staff, the one who left 14 months ago. Someone kept his credentials active. Someone inside this company kept his credentials active and handed them to whoever did this. She pressed both palms flat on the desk, a gesture he'd seen her make before when she needed the physical contact with something solid. I have Garrett in the server room and 2 people from IT trying to reach our cybersecurity contractor, and my general counsel is driving in, and by 6 a.m., this floor is going to be crawling with people. And by 8 a.m., the board is going to be in contact, and by 10 a.m., whoever designed this is going to use it to accelerate the co-CEO timeline. She stopped. She looked at the screen. I am trying very hard to stay in front of this. What do you need first? Mason said. She blinked, like the question hadn't been what she expected. What do I need first? She repeated. You've got a server room issue, a network issue, climate control down on 8 floors, and a building systems problem. What's the critical path? What breaks the rest of it loose if we fix it first? She stared at him for a moment. Then the CEO in her, the part that had spent 30 years watching her father build something, and 6 years being his second in command, and 3 years fighting a war on multiple fronts simultaneously. That part organized itself visibly, like a machine settling into a task. The encryption on the board documentation, she said. If Garrett can't crack it, we need a forensic record that proves we didn't put it there. That's the legal protection. Everything else is operable. She looked at her screen. Climate control is a discomfort issue, not a critical system. Network is mostly superficial. The data lock is the weapon. I'll go back down to Garrett. Mason. She said his first name. He stopped. Why are you here? He looked at her. Because this is where I work. It's midnight. You have a daughter. You have no obligation to be in this building right now. I know, he said. Then why? Because, he said, and he stopped. And he thought about how to say it without making it into something that would make her uncomfortable, or that she'd feel she needed to respond to. Because you've been fighting this alone long enough, and I had 20 minutes to get here. So, he didn't wait for her response. He went back to the elevator and rode down to sublevel 2. The next 4 hours were the kind of hours that didn't feel like time. They felt like a sequence of problems, each one leading directly to the next. No gaps, no resting place. Garrett cracked the encryption wrapper at 2:15 a.m. Not fully, but enough to extract a forensic fingerprint that proved the encryption had been introduced by an external process, not an internal one, which was the legal point Vivian's general counsel needed. Mason spent 90 minutes on the building management system, bypassing the compromised segments and rerouting climate control through the backup infrastructure, which was inelegant and loud and would need proper repair in the morning, but would keep the servers from cooking themselves. He found a second point of entry in the network that Garrett had missed. A secondary access log showing the same inactive credential had done a preliminary probe of the system 6 days earlier, which meant the attack had been planned at least a week in advance. He printed the log, the building's systems printer on 42, running on emergency power, taking twice as long as usual, and walked it to Vivian's office at 3:45 a.m. She was still at her desk. She hadn't moved in the last 2 hours except to answer phone calls. Her general counsel, a compact woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh, was stationed at the conference table with 3 monitors running and a coffee cup that had been refilled at least twice. 2 people from IT had set up a temporary station in the hall. Mason set the log on Vivian's desk. She looked at it, then she looked up at him. 6 days, she said. The preliminary probe was last Thursday, the night before your board call with Harrington. Something moved through her face, quick and sharp and gone before he could name it. They knew I was making a final push for his vote. Looks like it. This was designed to happen regardless of how the vote went. A contingency. She picked up the log. If I'd won the vote, this crashes my credibility within a week of the win. Since I lost it, this accelerates the implementation timeline. She looked at the log the way she looked at everything, directly, completely, taking it in. They had me either way. They thought they did, Mason said. She looked at him. You've got a forensic record that proves external intrusion, he said. You've got the secondary probe log establishing premeditation. You've got the credential trail linking to a former employee. And your general counsel is sitting in your conference room at 4 in the morning. He looked at Dr. Marsh, who looked back at him with the alert, focused expression of someone who hadn't stopped thinking for the last 3 hours. That's a different situation than the one they designed. Dr. Marsh nodded once, slowly. He's right. This changes the board position significantly. An active investigation into corporate sabotage, potentially criminal, gives us grounds to pause the co-CEO implementation pending a full governance review. Vivian sat very still. That's 60 more days, Dr. Marsh said. Minimum. The office was quiet for a moment. Outside the windows, the city was in that deep night state where the lights were all still on, but the movement had thinned, everything running on overnight logic. Who else is still in the building? Vivian asked. Garrett's still in the server room, Mason said. Bryce is at the lobby desk. Your 2 IT people in the hall. Patricia? I called her, Doctor. Marsh said. She's on her way in. Vivian looked at Mason. He'd been here for 4 hours. He had dark circles under his eyes that were visible even in the dim light of the emergency-augmented office. And his toolbox was sitting against the wall where he'd set it 2 hours ago and hadn't touched since because the technical problems had given way to the evidence problem and then to the documentation problem. And at some point in the last hour, he'd just stayed. Not because he had a task, just because the room needed someone in it. You should go home, she said. Your daughter. Mrs. Alvarez is with her. She's fine. You've been here since midnight. So have you, he said. She opened her mouth, closed it. Let me get you something to eat, he said. There's a diner on Clement that opens at 4. I can be back in 20 minutes. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He picked up his jacket. What do you want? She stared at him with the expression of someone who had been asked that question so rarely that it still required a moment to process. Something warm, she said finally. He nodded. He went to the elevator. In the lobby, Bryce looked up from the security desk. How's it looking up there? Better than an hour ago, Mason said. Not good yet, but better. Bryce nodded. She's something else, isn't she? Miss Hayes. Mason buttoned his jacket against the pre-dawn cold. Yeah, he said. She is. He pushed through the lobby doors into the empty street, the city quiet around him in a way it almost never was, and he walked the half block to the corner and turned toward Clement. And somewhere above him, the 42nd floor was still lit and still working, and Vivian Hayes was still in it. And that felt, at 4:15 in the morning on a Wednesday that had become a Thursday, like the only thing that mattered. He came back with 2 containers of soup, a paper bag of toast, and 2 coffees. And when he stepped off the elevator on 42, the floor was different than when he'd left it. Patricia had arrived, coat still on, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who'd processed the situation in the car ride over and arrived already operational. Dr. Marsh's temporary station in the conference room had expanded. A second attorney had appeared from somewhere, a young man with a laptop and the specific wide-awake alertness of someone who'd been asleep 2 hours ago and was now running on adrenaline and professional obligation. The 2 IT people in the hall had been joined by a third, and they were talking in the low, rapid shorthand of people solving something together. The floor that had been nearly abandoned for months looked, for the first time since Mason had known it, like a place where something was happening. He brought the food to Vivian's office. She was on the phone, but she looked up when he came in and pointed at the corner of the desk, which he took as permission to set things down. He left the soup where she could reach it and took the second coffee to Patricia, who accepted it with both hands and the expression of someone receiving something they hadn't realized they needed. She hasn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, Patricia said quietly. I know. She won't stop to eat during a crisis, even when the crisis is partly because she hasn't slept or eaten. I got soup. She can drink it while she works. Patricia looked at him for a moment. You went out at 4 in the morning to get soup. The diner on Clement was open. She shook her head slowly, not in disapproval, in the way people shake their heads when something is slightly beyond what they expected from the world. By 6:30 a.m., the shape of the night's damage was clear enough to work with. Garrett had a full forensic package ready, the credential trail, the premeditation log showing the preliminary probe, The encryption fingerprint proving external introduction. Dr. Marsh and her associate had drafted a preliminary legal memo framing the incident as deliberate corporate sabotage by parties with apparent access to insider information, which was accurate and also the most favorable framing available, and she'd emailed it to 2 board members before 7 a.m. so that when the rest of the board woke up and started making calls, there was already a document in their inbox that structured the narrative before anyone else could. Mason understood, watching this, that what Vivian was doing wasn't just crisis response. It was chess. She'd been playing it all night, not reacting, but repositioning, taking a situation that had been designed to destroy her and finding the angles within it that could be turned back around. He couldn't have done it. It wasn't his kind of intelligence, but he could recognize it, and he did. And there was something clarifying about watching someone operate at the top of their actual capability under genuine pressure. It stripped away the parts of a person that are presentation and left the real thing underneath. The real thing underneath Vivian Hayes was formidable. It was also exhausted and running low and holding on by the force of its own refusal to stop. At 7:15, she got off a call and picked up the soup. It had gone lukewarm. She drank half of it in 3 long swallows without appearing to notice the temperature, set it back down, and went back to her laptop. Mason was recalibrating the climate control override he'd set up in the night. It had been holding, but it needed a permanent fix, which meant getting into the building management panel on sublevel 2 again. He was running a diagnostic on his laptop in the supply room doorway when he heard her voice from the office, and something in the tone made him stop. She wasn't on a call. She was talking to Patricia. 3 board members have already responded to Elaine's memo. Clement wants an emergency session, and Gwen called me directly. A pause. Harrington hasn't responded. Give him time, Patricia said. He's the type that reads everything twice before he reacts. He voted against me 3 weeks ago. He voted the direction the room was moving. That's different from being committed to it. The sound of Patricia sitting down. Elaine's memo is going to change the room. It might, or it might be read as me manufacturing a crisis to buy time. Vivian's voice was flat, but not the controlled flatness Mason was used to. This was a different quality. Thinner, more worn. I've been accused of that before. When the operations metrics came in strong in February, 2 board members suggested I'd manage the numbers. I had not managed the numbers, but the accusation doesn't require proof. It just requires people who are already inclined to believe it. Then we prove it again. Patricia. A longer pause. I am very tired. It was so simply said that Mason felt it land physically. Not a complaint. Not a performance. Just a fact, delivered in the same straightforward way Vivian delivered all facts. And maybe that's why it hit the way it did. Because it had exactly the same weight and tone as everything else she said, which meant it was exactly as true. He heard Patricia say quietly, I know. I'm not saying I'm going to stop. I'm saying I'm tired. I know you're not stopping. My father never got tired, or if he did, he never said so. Your father didn't have to do what you've had to do. A silence. He had it easier in some ways, Patricia said, carefully but not gently, not treating her like something fragile. That's just true. He wasn't fighting the room the way you're fighting the room. He built the room. Yes, and you've had to justify your right to be in it every single day for 3 years, and that is a different and harder thing. A pause. Drink the rest of the soup. A short sound that might have been almost a laugh. It's cold. Drink it anyway. Mason went back to his diagnostic. He didn't feel like he'd been eavesdropping exactly. The conversation had happened in the normal register of voices in a building, not a private whisper, but he also understood it hadn't been for him, and he held it carefully. Harrington called at 9:40 a.m. Mason was in the hall running the permanent climate fix when Patricia appeared in the doorway and said Harrington, with the particular economy of someone who understood that the name carried its own weight in the current context. He stayed where he was, tools in hand, and didn't make any pretense of not being aware of what was happening 40 feet away. The call lasted 22 minutes. Mason could hear the duration because he was watching the clock on the wall panel, counting out the minutes with the attention of someone who understands that length sometimes tells you things content can't. 22 minutes was long enough for a real conversation, not a courtesy call, not a positioning statement, a real one. When it ended, the office was quiet for a moment. Then he heard the chair move, and Vivian appeared in the doorway of her office. She looked down the hall at Mason. He looked back. "He wants a meeting," she said. "In person. Tomorrow morning." "Good sign?" "Possibly." She pressed the back of one hand against her mouth briefly. A thinking gesture, one he'd seen before. He said he found the premeditation log, the preliminary probe from Thursday. Deeply concerning. She said the phrase in the careful way of someone repeating exact words because exact words matter. And he said he wanted to hear directly from me about the operations security infrastructure before he made any further determinations. "That's not a no," Mason said. "That's not a no," she agreed. He went back to the panel. She stayed in the doorway for a moment. "You've been here all night," she said. "I've had the climate system running on a bypass. Needed to get it on a proper circuit before the building goes into full operation." "Mason." He looked up. "You've been here all night," she said again, but differently. Not an observation, more like she was testing how the reality of it felt to say out loud. "I slept a few hours on the couch in the supply room," he said, which was partially true. He'd lain down for maybe 90 minutes. Whether it had been sleep was debatable. "You need to go home." "I will, after I finish this. Your daughter, goes to school at 8:15. Mrs. Alvarez takes her when I can't." He closed the panel cover. "She's fine. This needed to get done." Vivian looked at him with the expression he'd seen her deploy when she was processing something she hadn't planned to process. Something that didn't fit the structure she'd built for how things worked. He'd seen it before, in smaller moments. This was a larger version. "Why do you do this?" she said. Not sharp, not demanding, genuinely asking. He picked up his toolbox and looked at her. "Do what?" "This." She gestured at the panel, the hall, the floor. "The early mornings and the midnight calls and the soup from the diner. Your maintenance staff. You have defined responsibilities in this building, and none of them require—" She stopped. "Nobody has done this. In 3 years, nobody has just stayed, without being asked, without expecting something in return." She looked at him with something that was cracked open slightly at the edges. "I keep waiting to figure out what you want." Mason thought about how to answer that honestly without making it into something it would be uncomfortable to have said. "I don't want anything," he said. I can see what's happening on this floor, and I know how to fix things. Most things." He looked at the panel. "Not all of them, but the ones I can, I fix. That's it. That's not how most people work." "Maybe not." He picked up his toolbox. "But it's how I work." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the windows, the city was fully in its morning operation now. The light changed, the streets below probably full. The night was definitively over. "My father would have liked you," she said. It was quietly said. He understood it cost something. "Get some rest," he said, "before Harrington comes tomorrow." He went to the elevator. He felt her watching him until the doors closed. He slept for 4 hours at home and came back at 2 in the afternoon. Patricia met him at the elevator with an expression that was tired and cautious, and something else he couldn't immediately name. "The board called an emergency session for Friday," she said, 4 days away. "Clement pushed it through. He's positioning it as a governance review in response to the security incident." "Is that good?" "It's an opportunity. Elaine says it gives us the platform to make the sabotage case formally in front of the full board. With the forensic evidence and the premeditation log, the argument is strong." She walked with him toward the supply room. "There's also something else." He waited. "The former chief of staff, the one whose credential was used." She kept her voice low. "His name is Raymond Falk. He left 14 months ago. Didn't resign quietly, had a contested separation, claimed wrongful demotion, filed a brief complaint with the state labor board, which was dismissed, and then went quiet." She looked at Mason. Elaine's team found that 2 months after leaving, Falk took a consulting position with a firm called Greyland Advisory. Greyland has provided advisory services to 2 of the board members who've been leading the opposition, including Harrington's former business partner, who sits on the Greyland Executive Committee. Mason stopped walking. "That's a direct line," he said. "It's a connection." Elaine is careful to call it a connection, not direct evidence. But it's documented. Patricia crossed her arms. If Harrington genuinely doesn't know his former business partner's firm is connected to the person whose credentials were used to sabotage Vivian's company, and Elaine's read is that he might genuinely not know, then this meeting tomorrow morning is the moment he finds out. And if he does know? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then we find out what kind of man he actually is. Mason was not in the meeting with Harrington. He had no reason to be and no standing to be, and he didn't try to be. He was on the floor doing his work when the elevator opened at 9:15 the next morning, and a man in his 60s came off it with the bearing of someone accustomed to walking into rooms that mattered. Harrington was tall and well-dressed in a conservative way, silver-haired, the kind of man who had probably been in positions of authority long enough that it had become part of his physical posture. He looked around the floor when he stepped off the elevator, took in the empty desks, the quiet. He saw Mason near the supply room and gave a brief professional nod, the nod of a man who registered people in the environment without necessarily engaging them, and went down the hall to Vivian's office where Patricia was waiting to show him in. Mason went back to his work. The meeting lasted an hour and 40 minutes. At 11:05, he heard the office door open and the sound of Harrington's voice in the hall. Not words, just the register of it, which was different from when he'd arrived. More measured, something in it that had shifted. He heard Vivian say, clearly enough that it carried, "I'm not asking for your sympathy, Robert. I'm asking for your honesty about what you know and when you knew it." A pause. Harrington's voice still not fully audible, something that ended with what sounded like an acknowledgement. Then Vivian, "That's all I needed to hear." The elevator opened. Harrington got on it. The doors closed. Mason waited. Patricia appeared at the end of the hall and looked at him with her eyebrows raised in a way that asked the question without words. He shrugged. He didn't know yet. The office door was still open. He walked down the hall and knocked on the frame. Vivian was at her desk. She looked not triumphant, nothing like that. She looked like someone who'd just finished a very demanding piece of physical labor and was sitting with the fact of having finished it. He didn't know, she said. Mason came into the office. About Greyland, about Falk. He genuinely didn't know. She looked at her desk. He was angry, genuinely angry, not at me, at the situation he'd been put in without knowing he was in it. Is he going to change his vote? He's going to change his vote. She said it quietly, the way you say something when the fact of it hasn't fully landed yet. He said he'd speak to the other 2 before Friday. He made no promises about them, but he said he'd speak to them. Mason sat down in the chair across from her desk. He was tired. He'd slept 4 hours and worked a full day, and it was showing, and he didn't bother to hide it. That's not the end of it, she said. Even if the board session goes well Friday, the people who did this don't stop. They recalibrate. They find another angle. I know. I want you to understand that. It's not over. I know, he said again. It's not going to stop being hard. She looked at him steadily. Then why does it feel like something just shifted, she said. He thought about it. Because you're not alone in it anymore. Or not as alone. And that changes what hard feels like. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, continuous, indifferent to the specific weight of specific moments. Mason had learned to find something steadying in that rather than something cold. The city was going to keep going either way. That meant there was always a next thing to do. Patricia told me, Vivian said, that you stocked the kitchenette coffee for 2 months before I found out. It's better coffee. You paid for it yourself. The building supply is pretty bad. She looked at him with an expression that was tired and wry, and something else underneath both of those. You're a very strange person, Mr. Carter. I get that sometimes. I don't mean it as an insult. I know you don't. She looked at her desk, at the soup container from 4 in the morning, which was still there, empty. She'd drunk all of it, he realized. At some point in the chaos of the morning, she'd finished it. Tell me about the dolphin investigation, she said. He looked at her. Lily, she said, you said she'd been working on it. Tell me how it's going. He understood, in the way you understand things that aren't announced, that she was asking because she needed to sit in something ordinary for a few minutes. Not because the crisis was over. It wasn't over. But because there's only so long the human system can operate at maximum capacity before it needs a minute of something that isn't maximum. Current state of the investigation, he said, is that she's divided dolphins into 3 categories. Ones that are definitely okay with the eye thing, ones that are probably okay with it, and ones she thinks might be lying about being okay with it. How does she identify the lying ones? She says they swim funny. Vivian looked at him. She says they swim funny. She has a whole chart. Of course she does. A pause. What's her conclusion going to be? I think she's going to conclude they're all fine. I think she's been working her way to that conclusion since the beginning, and the investigation is the process of convincing herself it's true. What does she need to convince herself of? He was quiet for a moment. Her mom left when she was 2, he said. Lily doesn't really remember it, but she knows it happened. I think she's been working out whether something can be built for something it wasn't originally designed for, whether you can adapt to a thing you didn't choose. He looked at the window. Through the dolphins. Vivian didn't say anything for a long moment. Kids are braver than we give them credit for, she said finally. Yeah, she is. He stood up. I should finish the climate system log before the end of the day. Mason? She said his name the way she'd started saying it. Not formally, not like a question, just his name. Thank you for last night, for all of it. He nodded. You don't have to thank me. I know I don't have to. She met his eyes. I wanted to. Us. Friday's board session ran for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Mason was on the building's 18th floor when it started, replacing a section of conduit that had been flagged for months. And he worked steadily through the morning and didn't check his phone and didn't pace and didn't do any of the things that would have expressed the thing he was feeling, because expressing it wouldn't have changed anything, and the conduit needed replacing regardless of what was happening 3 floors above him. He was back on 42 by 12:30. Patricia was at her desk. Her expression told him before she said a word. 5 to 2, she said. The Kyo CEO provision is suspended pending the outcome of the criminal investigation into the sabotage. She had her hands flat on the desk, the same way Vivian did when she needed contact with something solid. Harrington, Clement, and Wen, and 2 others. The 2 opposition holdouts voted no, but 5 to 2 is enough. Mason stood very still. The criminal referral is going to the state attorney's office, Patricia continued. Greyland Advisory is named in the documentation. Falk's involvement is detailed. She swallowed. Vivian still has to fight. The investigation takes time. The board dynamics don't resolve overnight. There's still the day-to-day of running a company while all of this is in process. She looked up at him. But she bought time, real time, on solid ground. He nodded. Where is she? In there. Patricia tilted her head toward the office. She asked for an hour alone. Okay. He went to the supply room. He sat at the work table. He opened his maintenance log and wrote, Friday. Climate system fully restored to primary circuit. All systems nominal. He looked at what he'd written. Outside the supply room's small window, the city was midday bright, the light clear and direct in the way of a late spring Friday when the air had finally decided to cooperate. He could hear the building doing its regular work around him, the HVAC at its steady hum, the distant sound of an elevator arriving, somewhere a door opening and closing. After a while he heard the wheelchair in the hall, moving slowly, not the fast, purposeful pace she used when something needed handling, just moving. He heard it stop near the supply room. He looked up. Vivian was in the doorway. She looked like someone who had been inside a very loud and demanding thing for a very long time and had just stepped outside it, and the contrast was still registering. She didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, and he looked back, and between them was everything that had accumulated over the past 5 months in this building. The morning coffees and the late nights, and the board meetings, and the 4 a.m. soup, and the conduit work, and the forensic logs, and the maintenance log entries, and the dolphin investigation, and everything else that had built up quietly between two people who hadn't planned on any of it. 5 to 2, she said. I heard. She looked at her hands in her lap. I keep thinking I'm going to feel something big. Relief, or, I don't know, something big and obvious. She looked up. Mostly I just feel like I can breathe in slightly longer intervals than I could this morning. That's probably what winning actually feels like, Mason said. It's not usually what you think it'll be. Is that from experience? It's from being a single parent. Small wins, and the win is that tomorrow's a little more manageable than today. She considered this. Then she rolled a little further into the supply room doorway. Not fully in, just far enough that she wasn't talking across a threshold. I owe you something, she said. I'm aware I'm not good at this. At acknowledging what people do. Patricia tells me I'm not good at it. She's right. You don't owe me anything. Let me finish. She looked at him directly. You've been on this floor every day for 5 months. You fixed things nobody asked you to fix and stocked coffee you paid for yourself and came in at midnight during a crisis because a facilities coordinator called you and She paused. You've stayed. When everyone else on this floor has a list of reasons to leave, you've stayed. And I don't know how to make that make sense except to say that it's mattered. It has materially changed what I've been able to do. Not because you did anything. I mean, you did do things, the climate bypass and the forensic log were critical, but more because, she stopped. Because it changes what it means to come in every morning when someone is going to be here. Mason let that sit for a moment. This building is better with you in it, he said. This floor is better with you in it. That's just true. The fact that a lot of people didn't want to be here to see it is their problem. She looked at him for a long time. Your daughter is lucky, she said quietly. She'd argue with you on the soup thing, but mostly I think she's doing okay. That almost smile again, the one that lived next to the real thing. Go home, she said. See her. I'll do the end-of-day walkthrough first. Mason. 30 minutes, then I'll go. She shook her head, but she was almost smiling, and she went back down the hall, and he heard her office door close. Not the way it closed when something was wrong, but just the way a door closes at the end of a long day when the person on the other side of it has somewhere to be and something to go back to. He finished the walkthrough in 25 minutes. Every system nominal, everything in order. He got his jacket from the supply room hook and picked up his toolbox and stood in the empty hallway for a moment, the familiar quiet of the floor around him, the building breathing its regular breath. Then he went home to his daughter, who had news about the dolphin investigation and a drawing she wanted to show him, and a very serious question about whether he thought dolphins ever got lonely, which he answered as carefully and honestly as he could, because she deserved careful and honest, and because the question underneath the question was always worth answering right. The criminal investigation into Raymond Falk and his connection to Grayland Advisory moved through the state attorney's office with the particular slow grind of institutional processes that nobody could rush and everybody had opinions about. There were depositions and document requests, and a period in June when 3 different law firms were involved, and the legal correspondence alone filled a dedicated folder on Dr. Marsh's server that expanded weekly. Mason didn't follow most of it. He understood the broad strokes. Falk had cooperated relatively quickly once the forensic evidence was laid out, and 2 of the Grayland executives had lawyered up in ways that suggested they had things worth protecting. But the details were Elaine Marsh's territory, and he stayed in his. His territory was this 42nd floor, and the 42nd floor was changing, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that things change when the pressure on them shifts, gradually, and then with more speed than you expected. By the end of May, Patricia had hired a new executive coordinator, a woman named Sonia, who was organized and direct, and who had done her research on the position before accepting it, which meant she came in without illusions and stayed anyway, which Patricia said was exactly the kind of person she'd been looking for. In June, Vivian brought on a new head of investor relations, a man named Kwame. who had been following Evercrest's situation from the outside, and who told Vivian in his interview that he wanted to work somewhere the leadership actually meant something, which was either idealistic or a good read of the situation, and which turned out to be the second thing. The empty desks on the 42nd floor started to fill. Not all of them. Vivian was deliberate about it, more deliberate than most people would have expected from someone who'd spent 3 years working in a near-empty room. She didn't hire fast. She interviewed people twice, sometimes 3 times. She asked strange questions that Patricia said were designed to figure out not whether someone was competent, but whether they had the specific kind of durability that the floor required. She turned down several candidates who were, by any objective measure, excellent, because something in their answers suggested they'd treat the position as a stepping stone rather than a place to actually be. Mason watched this with the quiet attention he'd been bringing to everything on that floor since November, and what he thought, not for the first time, was that Vivian Hayes had understood something about people that most executives hadn't, which was that the quality of a team wasn't determined by the quality of individuals in isolation. It was determined by what people did under pressure, and specifically by whether they stayed or went when staying got hard. She'd learned that the expensive way, and she was applying it now in every hiring decision she made, and the floor that resulted from it was different in texture from anything Mason had seen in a building like this. It was a floor where people showed up. Bent. Lily turned 6 in July, and Mason threw her a small birthday party in the apartment. 5 kids from her class, a cake he'd made himself from a recipe that had required 3 attempts to get right, and a decoration theme that Lily had described as ocean, but specifically dolphins, and which Mason had executed with a combination of store-bought streamers and hand-drawn banner letters that were not his best work but that Lily had declared perfect, which was the only opinion that mattered. The dolphin investigation had reached its formal conclusion in June. Lily had presented it to Mason over dinner one evening with the gravity of someone delivering important findings to a scientific community. "They're okay," she said. "All of them, even the ones that swim funny." "What convinced you?" "They keep swimming," she said. "Every day they just keep swimming, even with one eye open and having to think about breathing." She pushed a piece of broccoli around her plate. "If they weren't okay, they would have stopped." Mason looked at his daughter. "That's a solid conclusion," he said. "I know." She ate the broccoli. "I'm going to start a new investigation." "About what?" "I haven't decided yet." She thought about it. "Maybe whales. Bigger subject." "I know. That's why I need to think about it." He washed dishes that night thinking about what she'd said. If they weren't okay, they would have stopped. There was something in it, a 6-year-old's logic that happened to be exactly right. The kind of right that you can't get to through sophistication, only through simplicity. He thought about Vivian, who had kept swimming for 3 years with one eye open, who had kept breathing even when the mechanism for it was exhausting, and who was still there. He thought about the fact that still being there was, by Lily's logic, evidence of something. Not that everything was fine, not that it hadn't cost anything, but that the thing underneath it was intact. He told Vivian about the conclusion the next morning. He'd started doing that, telling her about the dolphin investigation's progress. It had become a small ritual between them, the kind that develops without anyone deciding to make it one, the kind that you only notice in retrospect when you realize it's been happening for a while. She was at her desk with her first coffee and a contract she was reviewing, and she looked up when he came in with the morning panel check report, and he said, "Investigation reached a conclusion," and she put the contract down. "And?" "They're okay. All of them. The evidence is that they keep swimming." Vivian was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window. That same window, the same view she'd been looking at all year. The city in its summer version now. The light different, the air outside different, everything the same building and the same view, and genuinely different. "She's going to be remarkable," Vivian said. "Your daughter." "She's already remarkable. I'm just trying to keep up." "Does she know that? That you think so?" He thought about it. "I tell her when she does something worth telling her about. I don't make a general statement about it. I don't think that's how she'd want to hear it." Vivian looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Same way you know anything about a person. You pay attention." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the contract, and he finished the panel report, and they went about the morning. The board session in August was the first one since April that had no particular crisis attached to it. It was a regular quarterly review, operations metrics, budget forecasts, the standard architecture of corporate governance that keeps running regardless of what else is happening. Vivian prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, which was thoroughly and without apparent anxiety. But Mason noticed in the week leading up to it that she was sleeping slightly more. Not well. She didn't sleep well. That was a chronic condition he'd come to understand. But more hours, which meant her body was doing the thing bodies do when the acute phase of something passes and they start reclaiming the rest they deferred. She came back from the board session in the early afternoon on a Tuesday, and she stopped by the supply room on her way down the hall, which she didn't usually do. 4-3 in my favor, she said, leaning in the doorway. On the capital allocation question, Harrington proposed a significant infrastructure investment I've been pushing for 18 months. It passed. Good, Mason said. It's a real thing. It changes the company's position meaningfully over the next 5 years. She looked at the doorframe. I've been trying to get that approved for a year and a half. Every time I proposed it, it got tabled. She was quiet for a moment. Today it wasn't close to being tabled. Rooms change, Mason said. Rooms change, she agreed. She looked at him steadily. I don't have the language for what this year has been. I've thought about it, and I don't have it. You don't need language for it. I know, but I want you to know I've thought about it. She looked at the doorframe again. My father used to say that you could learn everything you needed to know about a person by watching what they did when nothing was in it for them. She looked at Mason. I thought about that a lot this year. He didn't say anything. I promoted Sonia this morning, she said, shifting, not deflecting exactly, but moving to more manageable ground. And Kwame's team is expanding. The floor is going to look different by October. Good different. I think so. A pause. I'm hiring a facilities coordinator, specifically for this floor, to work alongside building management. She looked at him carefully. I'd like it to be you if you want it. It's a different title, better pay, and you'd be permanently assigned to this building at the executive level, reporting directly to my office. She said it plainly, the way she said everything. Not because I feel like I owe you something, because you're the right person for the work. Those are different things, and I want to be clear about which one it is. Mason looked at her. I know they're different, he said. Then? Can I think about it? Of course. She straightened. Take whatever time you need. She went back down the hall. He sat at the work table and looked at the wall and thought about it for maybe 4 minutes, which was approximately how long it took to confirm what he'd already known before she finished the sentence. He went and found her in her office. Yes, he said. She looked up from her laptop. To the position, he said. Something happened in her face, quick and genuine and gone before it could be studied, but he caught the edge of it. Something that was closer to relief than she probably intended to show. Good, she said. And then, because she was Vivian and she defaulted to practicality, when she was in the territory of things that mattered. I'll have Patricia send you the paperwork. Sure, he said. I'll be in the hall. He told Lily that evening over dinner. Real dinner this time. Chicken and rice he'd actually planned and made with time to spare because the months since spring had been finding a rhythm that included small improvements like cooking with time to spare. You got a new job? She said. Same building, same work mostly, different title. What's the title? Facilities coordinator, executive level. She thought about this. Does that mean you're in charge of fixing things? More or less? That's what you already do. Yes, but now it's official. She ate some rice. Does the lady in the wheelchair know? Mason paused. He'd mentioned Vivian a few times over the months. Lily had absorbed the details the way she absorbed everything, quietly and completely, and then referenced them at unexpected moments. She offered me the job, he said. Does she eat the soup now? What? You said she didn't eat enough. Does she eat now? Mason considered the accurate answer. Better than before. Lily nodded,
satisfied, and went back to her food with the expression of someone whose concern has been addressed. Then, "Can I meet her sometime?" He looked at his daughter. "Why?" "Because you talk about the building a lot, and she's the person in the building you talk about most." She said it with the matter-of-fact directness of a child who hasn't yet learned to soften observations. "And because she sounds like someone worth meeting." "I'll think about it," he said. "That means yes eventually," Lily said. "It means I'll think about it." She pointed her fork at him the way she'd been doing since she was 3, the gesture he'd somehow never managed to discourage. "Daddy, it means yes eventually." He didn't argue with her. She was usually right. Fun.
It happened in September, and it wasn't planned, which was probably why it worked. Mason had started the new role in late August, and one of its minor practical changes was that he now had a small actual office on the 42nd floor. Not the supply room with the work table, but a real room with a desk and a window, and enough space for his tools and his laptop and the maintenance logs that had become a real system rather than a formality. The room had been one of the long, empty offices, cleared of its ghost desk quality and furnished simply. He'd done the work himself over 2 Saturdays, which Patricia had observed was either deeply practical or deeply symbolic, and probably both. Lily had a school holiday on the second Friday of September. Mason's usual arrangement with Mrs. Alvarez fell through. A family thing, nothing serious, just unavailable, and he'd exhausted his other options by 8 a.m. He called Patricia, not because he expected it to be her problem to solve, but because she knew the building and sometimes knew solutions he didn't. "Bring her," Patricia said. "I'm at work." "I know you're at work. Bring her anyway. She can sit in your office. You can check on her. It's one day." A pause. "Vivian won't mind." "I haven't asked Vivian." "I'm aware. Bring her." He brought her. Lily came in wearing a backpack that contained a book, a sketch pad, approximately 14 colored pencils, and a small stuffed dolphin she'd named Gerald, which she'd received for her birthday and which accompanied her on most significant outings. She looked at the lobby with the focused attention of someone on a field trip, asked Mason 2 questions about the elevator panel that he answered accurately, and emerged onto the 42nd floor with the expression of someone who had expected something and was calibrating against reality. "It's quiet," she said. "It's an office. It's very high up." 42 floors." She looked down the hall. "Which one is her office?" "The one at the end, but we're not going to—" "Okay," Lily said and started walking toward it. He caught up with her. "Lily, I'm just looking. You're walking directly toward it. I can walk and look at the same time." She stopped outside the supply room, Shanti, his old supply room, and looked in. "Is this where you used to work?" "The work table, yes." She looked at it with the seriousness of someone examining a historical site. "It's small." "It was fine." She nodded and moved on. He walked beside her, and they passed Patricia's desk. And Patricia looked up and saw Lily, and her face did something complicated and warm, and she said, "You must be Lily," in the way of someone who'd been hearing about a person for months. And Lily said, "Yes, and you must be Patricia," in return, which made Patricia laugh. A real laugh, the kind that surprised you on the way out. "I've heard about you," Patricia said. "I've heard about you too," Lily said. "Daddy says you're the one who actually keeps everything running." Patricia looked at Mason. "She's not wrong," Mason said. And that's when Vivian's office door opened. She came out into the hall the way she did sometimes when she needed a brief change of environment, not going anywhere specific, just moving, which Mason had learned was her version of standing up to stretch. She came around the corner and stopped when she saw the small person in the hallway with the backpack and the serious expression. They looked at each other, Vivian and Lily, in the particular way of 2 people who have heard about each other and are now conducting a rapid mutual assessment. Lily spoke first because she almost always did. "Are you the lady in the wheelchair?" Mason started to say something. Vivian raised one hand slightly, the gesture that meant she had it. "I am," she said. "I'm Lily. My dad works here." She looked at the chair with curiosity rather than discomfort. "Does it go fast?" "When I want it to." "Can I see?" Vivian looked at Mason, not for permission. He knew her well enough to know she wasn't asking permission, but in the way you check the face of someone who matters before you do something that involves what matters to them. He gave her nothing in particular, just looked back, which she apparently read correctly because she turned back to Lily and said, "Stand at the end of the hall." Lily went to the end of the hall and turned around. Vivian went back to her office and then came down the hall at a pace she genuinely didn't usually use indoors, a quick and direct movement that covered the length of the floor in a few seconds, and she stopped neatly about 3 feet from Lily, who had not moved and who was watching with an expression of unguarded delight. "That's fast," Lily said. "It has good motors. Gerald would like that." She unslung her backpack and extracted the stuffed dolphin. "This is Gerald. He's conducting an investigation." Vivian looked at the dolphin, then at Mason. He shrugged in a way that was honest. "What's the investigation about?" Vivian asked. "Currently undetermined," Lily said. "The dolphin investigation just concluded. Gerald is between projects." She looked at Vivian with the direct attention she gave things she was actually interested in. "Are you okay?" Vivian blinked. "Am I? Daddy says you work really hard, and that it's been a hard year, so I wanted to ask." Something moved across Vivian's face, quick and private, and then resolving into something that was real and a little undone. "I'm doing better than I was," she said. Honest, not the managed version. Lily nodded as if this was the right answer. "That's what the dolphins said too." "The ones in the investigation?" "Yes. They didn't say they were perfect. They said they were doing better." Vivian looked at this 6-year-old with the stuffed dolphin and the backpack full of pencils, and Mason, watching, saw the thing happen that he'd suspected might happen if these two people ever occupied the same space, which was that Vivian, who maintained very careful control of what she let reach her, did not manage to maintain it, and something reached her anyway, and she let it. "That sounds like a very honest investigation," Vivian said. "I try to be accurate," Lily said. Patricia made a sound in her office that she immediately covered. Lily spent the day in Mason's office, drawing at the desk with the window, which she declared was the best desk she'd ever used because of the view. And at noon, Patricia brought sandwiches for everyone, and they ate in the small conference room. All 4 of them, Sonia joining toward the end, Kwame stopping in briefly. And it was the most people Mason had seen eat lunch together on that floor in the entire year he'd worked there. Vivian stayed for 20 minutes, which was longer than Mason had expected. She asked Lily about the drawings, which were a preliminary survey of possible whale species for the next investigation, and Lily explained the methodology with the seriousness of a researcher presenting at a conference. And Vivian listened with the complete attention she gave to things that deserved it and asked 2 questions that Lily found genuinely interesting, and Mason sat and ate his sandwich and watched the 2 of them and felt something settle in him that had been slightly unsettled for a long time. After lunch, on her way back to her office, Vivian paused by Mason's doorframe. "She's exactly what I expected," she said quietly. "Is that good?" "It's very good." She looked at the small figure bent over the desk with the pencils. "You've done something right with her. Whatever it is you're doing, it's right." He looked at his daughter. "I mostly just show up." "Mason," Vivian looked at him directly. "That's the whole thing. That is the entire thing." She said it plainly, with the weight she put behind facts she wanted to make sure registered. Showing up is not the minimum. It's not the floor. It's the whole thing. Most people don't understand that. He thought about the empty desks, the abandoned coffee mug that had been there on his first day, 6 coordinators and 4 executive assistants. He thought about everything that had left this floor and everything that had stayed and what the difference turned out to be. "I know," he said. She went back to her office. The door stayed open. October brought new hires and restructured operations and a quarterly report that Kwame called the strongest in 3 years, which Vivian reviewed with the cautious precision of someone who had learned not to trust good news until it had been verified from multiple angles. It was strong. She said so, and meant it, and also put it in the context of the work that remained, which was considerable, because that's who she was and how she thought, and Mason had stopped expecting her to be otherwise. The criminal case against Falk concluded in October with a plea agreement, cooperation in exchange for reduced charges, which meant the full picture of what Greyland Advisory had organized came out in documented form, which meant 3 board members who had not been named in the original investigation found themselves in conversations with the state attorney's office that they had not planned on having. 2 of them resigned from the Evercrest board in November. The remaining 5, Harrington, Clement, Nguyen, and 2 others, reorganized the board structure in a way that reduced the concentration of oppositional influence that had made the past 3 years possible. It wasn't a clean resolution. Nothing about it was clean. Vivian still had fights ahead of her. The company still had competitors and critics and market pressures that had nothing to do with any individual's agenda, the ordinary grinding difficulty of running a large organization in a world that doesn't stop being complicated because you'd like it to. There were days in November when she was short-tempered and days in December when she stayed at the window for too long in the mornings and days throughout the fall, when Mason could see the weight of it on her and couldn't do anything except be there, which he was, which turned out to be the thing. He thought about what she'd said. Showing up is not the minimum. It's the whole thing. He'd believed something like that before he had language for it, had built his life around it, really, since Lily's mother left, and he'd understood that the only thing he could control was whether he stayed and what he did while he was there. But hearing it said back to him, plainly and without sentiment, by someone who had spent 3 years discovering it the hardest possible way, that landed differently. It made him understand that he hadn't invented the idea and he hadn't perfected it. He'd just been practicing it, imperfectly, the way you practice anything that matters, which is by doing it again every day and trying to do it slightly better than the day before. The night before Christmas, the building was quiet in the deep specific way of a city on a holiday eve. Most offices dark, the lobby running on minimal staff, the heating system working harder than usual against a cold December that had finally decided to be cold in the way Decembers were supposed to be. Mason was doing a final walkthrough, force of habit, not a scheduled thing, just a loop he'd started doing on his way out that had become automatic, when he saw the light under Vivian's door. He knocked. "Come in," she said, and he came in, and she was at the desk with a single lamp on and a glass of something on the corner and papers in front of her that she'd been reading but had stopped reading. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." Walk through habit. "I know." She looked at the papers. "I was going to leave an hour ago." "What happened?" "I started reading the Q3 infrastructure report, and then I was reading it." She leaned back in the chair. "It's a compulsion." "You can read it tomorrow." "I know." She didn't move. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, the guest chair, the one that had been unused for so long and that he'd now occupied enough times that it had stopped feeling like a guest chair and started feeling like a regular one. The office was quiet around them. Outside the windows, the city was lit in its winter way. Different light in December, something in the color of it that was particular to this time of year, and that Mason had always found easier to be inside looking at than to describe. "My father and I used to work on Christmas Eve," Vivian said. "In the early years of the company, there was always something to do, always some problem that hadn't resolved before the holiday, and he'd call me and say, 'Come in, I need another brain,' and I'd come in and we'd work until midnight sometimes." She looked at the window. "I hated it when I was younger. I thought it meant he didn't know how to stop." A pause. "Now I think he just wanted the company. Not the work, the company." The work was an excuse. She turned the glass on the desk without picking it up. "He was better at needing people than I am. He wasn't good at saying it directly, but he was better at the general project of it." "You've gotten better," Mason said. She looked at him. "You have," he said. "You don't have to agree. But from the outside, you've gotten better at it." She was quiet for a moment. "Patricia says the same thing, in her way." "Patricia's usually right." "I know. It's occasionally irritating." She almost smiled. "How is Lily?" "Awake, probably. She has strong opinions about Christmas Eve, and none of them involve going to bed at a reasonable hour." "What does she want?" "A book about whales, for the new investigation." He looked at the window. "And a better purple crayon than the one Trevor gave her. Apparently the quality was insufficient." Vivian laughed. "A real one.
not the contained professional version, a laugh that started somewhere genuine and came out without being managed. He hadn't heard it very often, but he recognized it, and it was one of the better sounds he'd heard in a long time. "Go home," she said. "You should too." "I will. I mean tonight, Vivian." She looked at him. He'd used her name, her first name, and he didn't walk it back because it was what he meant, and they were past the point of formality being something either of them needed. She held his gaze for a long moment. The lamp made the office warm against the dark outside, the city doing its slow Christmas Eve thing beyond the glass. Everyone somewhere, most people with someone. "Thank you," she said, "for this year." "It's been a good year," he said. "Mostly. The midnight soup was a highlight." The soup was fine, the company was the highlight. She looked at him directly, and he looked back. And between them was everything. The November mornings, and the board votes, and the 4 a.m. forensics, and the dolphin investigation, and Lily in the hallway asking if she was okay, and every unremarkable Tuesday when he'd shown up and done his work, and she'd been there doing hers, and all of it together amounted to something that neither of them had planned or named, but that was real in the way that only things built slowly and imperfectly tend to be real. "Go home, Mason," she said. "Good night, Vivian." He got his jacket. At the door, he stopped. "The infrastructure report will be there tomorrow," he said. "I know." "And the day after." "I know." She picked up the report and set it to the side of the desk, deliberately. "Good night." He went down the hall. Behind him, he heard the lamp click off, and then the sound of the chair, and then her door closing. Not the way it closed when the crisis was running, not the way it closed on bad days, just the ordinary sound of a door closing at the end of a day that had been, on balance, good. He rode the elevator down. The lobby was dim and quiet, and the night guard wished him a Merry Christmas, and he said the same back and meant it, and he walked out into the cold December air and called Mrs. Alvarez to say he was on his way, and she said Lily was still very much awake and had questions, and he said he'd be there in 20 minutes. He walked the first block with his hands in his pockets, the city spread out around him in its holiday version, and he thought about the year. Not in a summary way, not tallying things up, just the texture of it. The empty floor in November. The coffee he'd bought with his own money for weeks before anyone noticed. The board votes, and the midnight, and the forensic logs, and the soup. The way the floor had slowly, imperfectly, stubbornly filled back up. The way two people, both of them flawed and tired and carrying more than they showed, had managed, by the simple act of showing up every day and doing the next right thing, to build something solid enough to stand on. He thought about what Lily had said. If they weren't okay, they would have stopped. He thought, we didn't stop. And he thought that this was, in the end, the only thing that mattered. Not that you avoided the hard years or outran the people who wanted to bring you down or found some clean path through the complications life put in front of you. None of that was available. What was available was the choice you made every morning when you got up and went back and did it again. The decision, quiet and unremarkable and made without an audience, to be the kind of person who stayed. He'd made that decision a long time ago, long before he knew Vivian Hayes or the 42nd floor or any of it. He'd made it the day he understood that Lily was going to need him to make it every single day, without exception, without credit, without any guarantee of how things turned out. And somewhere over the past year, without planning to, he'd given someone else the chance to see what that looked like from the outside. He didn't know exactly what came next. That was true, and he was okay with it. He knew the floor would keep changing and the company would keep having problems, and Vivian would keep fighting the fights she needed to fight, and he'd keep doing his work. And some days would be hard in ways neither of them could predict, and some days would be easy in the small, ordinary way that easy days tended to be. He knew Lily was going to start the whale investigation in January, and that it was going to be extensive, and that at some point she was going to bring Gerald the dolphin in as a consultant, because that was how she worked, and that Vivian was probably going to end up hearing about it in real time, and that this was not something he had arranged, but something that had happened because the world had a way of connecting people who were paying attention to it. He turned onto his street. The apartment windows were lit. Through the glass, he could see the shape of Mrs. Alvarez on the couch, and the smaller shape of Lily beside her, still awake, very awake, facing the door like she'd known he was coming. He went up the steps. He put his key in the lock. The door opened from the inside before he could turn it.
Lily stood in the gap with Gerald under one arm and the expression of someone who had been waiting and was not going to pretend otherwise. "You're late," she said. 22 minutes. I said 20. That's late. Fair. He came in and closed the door behind him. The apartment was warm. Mrs. Alvarez was putting her coat on, and he thanked her, and she left, and the apartment became just the two of them, the way it always was at the end of the day. Lily climbed onto the couch and patted the cushion next to her, which was how she asked for things she was going to get regardless. He sat down. She leaned against him with the automatic ease of a child who had never had reason to doubt the solidity of what she was leaning against. "How was she?" Lily asked. "The lady?" "Vivian," he said. "Good. Better." "Was she still working?" "She stopped when I told her to go home." Lily nodded approvingly. "Good." She looked at Gerald. "Gerald thinks she's probably okay." "Gerald's probably right." "Gerald is always right." She pulled the dolphin closer. "He has good instincts." Mason put his arm around his daughter and looked at the apartment, small and warm in theirs, with the drawings on the refrigerator and the whale books already stacked on the coffee table in preparation for the investigation, and outside the window, the city going about its quiet Christmas Eve business, unconcerned with any particular story, but containing all of them. Some things you didn't plan. Some things arrived because you'd been paying attention and doing your work and refusing to walk away. And they arrived not as rewards exactly, but as the natural consequence of who you'd chosen to be. You couldn't engineer them. You could only make yourself the kind of person they could happen to. He'd spent a year on the 42nd floor of a building, fixing things that were broken, showing up every morning, doing the unremarkable and necessary work of being present. And something had grown from that. Not perfectly, not without cost, not without the full weight of how hard things can be, but steadily, honestly, in the way that real things grow. He thought that was enough. He thought, actually, that it was everything. Lily fell asleep against his shoulder sometime around 10, Gerald still tucked under her arm, the whale books waiting patiently on the table for January. Mason sat with her in the warm and quiet apartment and didn't move because she was sleeping and he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And outside the window, the city carried on, and up on the 42nd floor, the lights were finally off. And somewhere in it, a woman who had spent 3 years fighting alone was, for the first time in a long time, going home.